All right, people, this is the last section of chapter 12, and it's really got a lot of information in it, so I'm hoping to cover it in 2 sections, but I might have to break it to 3. With the end of War 1812, the intense divisions that had split the nation between the different areas sort of faded for a while because everybody was so very proud of our new war heroes, of the fact that we had stood up for ourselves against the British and had gotten what we wanted, even if we hadn't gained land. We had finally gotten them out of their forts. We had gotten them to stop raiding on our ships. So people were pretty proud of ourselves. And with the election in 1816, Monroe faced no opposition and wins by an overwhelming margin. And this period in our history is known as the era of good feelings. Please remember that. You'll probably be tested on an era of good feelings is James Monroe. All right. In his outgoing speech to Congress, Madison expresses the growing pride and nationalism, and the War of 1812 made it clear that Jefferson's idea of cutting the military and limiting the central government was not going to work. While they believed in states' rights and the idea that the states should have certain powers, it was pretty clear after the War of 1812 that we had to have a military, we had to have a navy, because we were going to have to be able to defend ourselves at any notice. I mean, we never knew what was going to happen around the world that would drag us into a war. And so part of this was that Madison urged the government to guide the growth of trade and industry, and Congress agreed, even though they were the same Democratic Republicans who had once screamed about states' rights. They agreed to go along with Madison's idea. All right, this is one of the few things that I think that Henry Clay, I can really say, great for Clay, good for Clay. He's still Speaker of the House. He's getting a little bit up in years at this point. And he proposed a program to help the nation grow. And the purpose of this American system was to help the economy and each section of the country strengthen the power of the central government. And the purpose of this is to link the parts of the country together economically. Please try to remember that. It calls for higher tariffs. People are not going to like this. It calls for a new Bank of the United States. Again, there's going to be some pushback on that. It also calls for internal improvements of building roads, bridges, and canals. This is very important because we've got so many more people living in the West, and Clay's state of Kentucky is one of these western areas, and he realizes there has to be better transportation system for us living in the West to link us up. We have to link the country up. All right, so like it says in the second to last bullet point, people didn't all go along with his ideas. All right, Congress was happy to go along with the tariffs in the bank, but there's not a whole lot of spending on roads, bridges, and canals at first. Again, they're dragging their feet. Everybody wants the money spent in their own district, in their own state, and they can't agree on where to put these canals and roads and bridges. And so the same arguing and fighting that you see today is the same thing that you saw back in those days. All right, so let's talk about the Second Bank of the United States. This is going to become important because later on it's become an issue that Andrew Jackson deals with during his presidency. Please try to follow me on this. Banks are made, they have a charter. This is like a permit to operate. It's like a little piece of paper that says you can open and you can operate. The charter for the First National Bank had expired in 1811. Now that's before the war opens, and Congress just let the bank die. They're like, no, we don't want this, we don't need this anymore, because they were the Democratic Republicans, and we don't want the bank. But in 1816, the Congress approved the creation of a new national bank, because it's part of the plan, it's part of Clay's wonderful plan, and Madison signs it into law. All right, between the time that the first bank closed and the second bank opened, state banks had acted stupidly. I know, shocking. They made too many bad loans, which led to inflation. This is when the stuff price goes up, but wages don't keep pace. So in other words, this is random. This is just a random example. So like if pretend the price of a loaf of bread is $1 1 week, and you go back in 2 weeks and it's $2, and you go back in 4 weeks and it's $3. But at the same time, no one's wages are going up in order to pay for the increase in the price of the loaf of bread. So it's a bad situation. With no national bank, the federal government doesn't have a safe place to keep its funds. It's going to collect money from tariffs and stuff, and so the national government doesn't have any place to go with its money. So in some ways, the Second Bank of the United States helped restore some stability to the money supply and helps businesses grow. My little inflation rat down there. All right. We have some competition from Great Britain during this time. We had a flood of British goods coming in from the country and from over there after the War of 1812. Trading resumes, and Britain is more than happy about that because we're their biggest trading partner. And everybody wants to get back to business as usual. Means a heavy flow of trade between Britain and the United States. And British factories turned out higher quality goods at a lower price because there's more factories over there. They've been set up and they're established, and it's higher quality stuff than what happens in the U.S. And so people want to buy British. And so this is what the tariffs are for. The American manufacturers want the high tariffs to help protect their goods, and Congress is happy to help them out with that. Merchants who were importers passed this tariff on to the price of goods. So this is what still happens. So, if hats, okay, I think there's a graphic in your book about hats. So if we have a hat maker in New England and his hats aren't as good as the ones that are coming in from England. So the hat store in Boston sells American hats and sells British hats. Well, the British hats are better quality, but the hat store is going to sell them for more money because they have to pay a tariff on those hats when they come into port. So the hat store is not going to absorb the cost of that tariff. The hat store is going to pass the price of that tariff on to the person who buys it. And that's what still happens, by the way. Nobody absorbs the cost of that. They pass it on to the consumer, all right? All right, Southerners are especially upset over this because when they trade, often what they get back instead of money is goods. So instead of getting, like cotton farmer, pretend. So cotton farmer sends his cotton to England, and some of his payment comes back in cloth that he is then going to sell locally to make the money back. But when the cloth comes into port, he has to pay a tariff on it, and that makes him upset, all right? So the tariffs are supposed to be used for the Clay's improvements, the roads, the canals, the bridges, but those improvements are taking place mostly in the north, and so the South feels left out. The South is getting very upset about this tariffing. They're not liking it at all because they're getting hurt worse by the tariffs, and they're not seeing any of the improvements from the tariffs, and so they're really feeling left out of the loop on this. And this is going to cause growing sectionalism, and you need to know this term, sectionalism, probably for a test. So the era of good feelings doesn't last for very long, and three distinct sections grew up in the U.S. The Western area, please understand, the Western area is actually only up to the Mississippi River. My little map is not accurate at all. The Southern area and the Northern area, and those distinct sections grow up. All right. In New England and the North, people worked in factories on small farms, were engaged in banking and trade. Honestly, this is the same distinct differences that you had from the beginning almost, except that you're going to add the Western area. And we're going to draw a graphic in our spiral on this in class because you've got to know this, how the economy is affecting each section. In the South, the economy depends on slave labor and cash crops. But you need to please remember that not all people were slave owners or had plantations in the South. In fact, most people were not. The controlling interests in the South, the people with money, the people with power, yes. But most people do not own slaves. Most people do not have plantations. They're most small dirt farmers. All right, in the West, the economy is based on growing things like corn and wheat on herds of cattle and pigs. And in the West, they are almost self-sufficient, except they don't have a manufacturing base. So they need to trade with the North in order to get things like furniture and finished goods. Please write these things down. John Deere steel plow, McCormick's mechanical reaper. You're going to be tested on them, all right? These two inventions help farming to become much more efficient, and this increases food production and enables the West to ship food into the Northeast, which enables the people in the Northeast to not worry so much about farming for food. More of them can go to work into factories. Those factories can turn out more finished goods, which can then be used for trade, either with the South, the West, or with Europe. So each section of the country becomes dependent on the other. I would add into that triangle that the North, a lot of the northern factories are textile mills producing cloth. What do they need? They need cotton from the South. It is a giant web between one section and the other. And like I said, we need to draw this in our spiral because you need to understand how it functions. All right, there were advances in communication at this time. Tying the country together in other ways was a telegraph. Now, this is pretty far down the road in time. It's 1844, but it's we'll talk about how it works, but it's a series of impulses. It's electrical impulses, and Lincoln uses this very efficiently to help run the war during the Civil War, whereas the South does not have the advantage of this nearly to the extent that Lincoln does. All right, I'm going to go through this frame and maybe one more and then stop and see where I'm at. All right, John Marshall, still the Supreme Court Justice, the Chief Justice, and we've talked about these Supreme Court cases before, but now we need to get into a little more depth. In 1819, this is just right after the War of 1812 is over, McCulloch versus Maryland said that the Maryland cannot tax the local office of the Bank of the U.S. So that's what they were trying to do. The state of Maryland said, aha, here's how I can make some money. I can tax the bank. The bank's got all this money. I'm going to tax the bank. Well, no, not so much. The Supreme Court says, no, you can't be taxing the national bank or even the state bank of Maryland. You're not be taxing the bank because it's a property of the national government. So the ruling declares that the national bank is indeed constitutional, even though the Constitution doesn't specify it. Now, Hamilton's no longer living, but of course this is a feather in the cap of the people who said that, yes, we have to have a national bank. All right, this one more Supreme Court case, and I'm going to quit for right now. Just a little bit later, so 5 years later, 1819, McCulloch versus Maryland, and then in 1824, the other Supreme Court case that was important during this time is Gibbons versus Ogden. So in this case, there was a steamship operator running between New York and New Jersey on the Hudson River. And they were saying that they were the only ones who could have steamships there. And they were going to charge other people money to operate their steamships there. And so these people were taken all the way to court, and they got all the way to the Supreme Court. And the court said that New York cannot do such a thing, but only the federal government can regulate interstate commerce, saying that steamship operators were carrying goods and people, and that's commerce, that's trade between one state and another, and that only the Supreme Court can regulate that thing. And what came out of this, more importantly, to simplify it, was that we were all going to be able to use all the rivers equally, and that each state could not decide how the other state was going to use the rivers. I'm going to stop here and hope that I'm about halfway, and if not, we'll have to break this into 3 parts.